Sharks have been around for hundreds of millions of years. And when we compare fossils of ancient sharks with modern sharks, it looks like there's basically no difference. Sharks seem to be one of those bizarre examples where evolution just hit pause and turned out the lights. But here's why that's not the case. This is a great white shark. It's the biggest predatory fish on the planet. And if you look at its body, everything about it seems honed and optimized for hunting. Its body shape is streamlined to slice through the water. Its mouth can open really wide to engulf prey. Its jaws are lined with rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth, and it has incredible senses to detect the electrical signals given off by prey hidden in the sand. The great white shark seems like the perfect predator, and indeed it is the apex predator. No other animal hunts them in the wild. But this form that we see today, this incredibly efficient killing machine, has been around in basically its present form for at least 160 million years. We know this because we've found fossils of great whites, or at least their ancestors, going back this far. And these ancient ancestors don't look all that different from today's great whites. And the same goes for many other types of sharks. Look at this mackerel shark. Fossil evidence suggests that it first appeared 200 million years ago, but it looks almost identical to modern-day mackerel sharks. Now, at first glance, it might look like these animals have just stayed the same for hundreds of millions of years, but that's not really the case. Just because something looks the same doesn't mean it isn't evolving. In fact, all species are evolving all the time, even if we can't see the changes. And sharks are no exception. So how do we know that sharks are continuing to evolve if they look so unchanged? Well, it's easy. We just have to look a little closer. The thing is, sharks can undergo a lot of change without changing shape. Let me explain. In order for natural selection to occur, there needs to be some sort of change in the genetic makeup of a population. This change, or mutation, can then be passed down to future generations. If this mutation gives an individual an advantage in surviving and reproducing, then it's more likely that the mutation will be passed on to future generations. So over time, this beneficial trait becomes more common within a population. And eventually, if enough time passes, this can lead to an entirely new species. But mutations don't always have to result in large, dramatic changes. Take the peppered moth, for instance. During the Industrial Revolution in England, a mutation arose in a population of peppered moths that made them darker in color. At the time, most peppered moths were light-colored, which helped them blend in with the light-colored trees. But with the onset of industrialization, pollution began to darken the trees. As a result, the light-colored moths became easier for predators to spot and eat, while the darker moths were better camouflaged. This meant that the darker moths were more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their genes. Over time, this led to a shift in the population, with more and more dark-colored moths appearing. This change in coloration happened because of a change in the genes that control pigment production, not because the moths underwent some kind of body plan change. And this is just one example. There are many different types of mutations that can occur, including those that affect a single gene. One example of this is sickle cell anemia, which is caused by a mutation in a single gene that results in a change in the shape of red blood cells. But even changes to single genes don't always result in noticeable changes to the organism. Many of these changes occur in non-coding regions of DNA, which means they don't directly affect the proteins that are produced. Even if a change does occur in a protein, sometimes the change is so small that it's difficult to detect without doing a close analysis. Now let's go back to our shark friends. Over the last 200 million years, scientists estimate that around 10% of shark species have gone extinct. That's a lot of species, but it also means that 90% of shark species are still around today. And this includes the mackerel shark and the great white shark. The fact that these animals have been around for so long suggests that they've found a successful formula and have been able to make fine adjustments along the way to keep thriving. But this doesn't mean they're completely unchanged. Let's take a closer look at the great white shark. First, let's start with their teeth. If you examine a great white's mouth, you'll notice that they don't have just one set of teeth. Instead, they have multiple rows of teeth, and these teeth are constantly being replaced throughout the shark's life. If a tooth falls out, a new one is ready to replace it. And the process starts again. This is an adaptation that helps the shark deal with the immense forces it experiences while feeding on prey. When the shark bites into something hard, like a sea lion's skull, for example, the tooth may break or fall out. But because the shark has a constant supply of replacement teeth, it's able to keep hunting and getting food. Great white sharks also exhibit different hunting strategies depending on what prey is available. For instance, great whites are known to target seals and sea lions. And to do this, they have to breach the surface of the water and grab their prey before it can escape. This requires a lot of energy. So when prey is scarce, great whites may settle for less energetic pursuits, like scavenging dead whales. By targeting slower-moving prey, great whites can save energy and still get nutrients. And as you can imagine, different prey items may require different hunting strategies. So great whites have had to adapt their hunting tactics over time to keep up with the changing prey populations in their environment. Sharks also use electroreception to help them find prey. Basically, sharks can detect the weak electrical signals given off by living things. Most animals, including sharks, produce weak electrical signals as they move. This is because muscle movement generates electrical currents. These signals can be picked up by special receptors called ampullae of Lorenzini, which are located on a shark's head. Sharks can use these receptors to sense the presence of prey even when it's buried in the sand. But the sensitivity of these receptors varies among shark species. Some sharks, like hammerheads, have more receptors than others. More receptors mean more sensitivity, and this is thought to give hammerhead sharks an advantage when it comes to finding buried prey. Even reproductive traits have evolved in sharks. Most sharks give birth to live young, but there are some species that lay eggs. Egg laying is thought to be the ancestral condition for sharks, meaning it's the trait that was present in the earliest shark-like animals. But over time, most shark species evolved to give birth to live young instead. Giving birth to live young allows the embryos to receive nutrients from the mother, which can increase the chances of survival. However, egg laying can be advantageous in certain environments. A study published in 2022 looked at two species of hound sharks, one that lays eggs and one that gives birth to live young. The researchers found that the egg-laying species had larger eggs and more offspring than the species that gave birth to live young. The researchers hypothesized that this is because egg-laying allows the mother to invest more resources into each egg, which increases the likelihood that at least some of the eggs will hatch successfully. So even though the basic shape of sharks hasn't changed all that much, that doesn't mean that nothing has changed. Sharks have undergone a lot of small changes over the past 200 million years, and these changes have added up. Okay, so what about the great white shark? Is it really 160 million years old? Well, it depends on what you mean by 160 million years. You could say that the great white shark has been around in its present form for 160 million years based on the fossil record. Fossils tell us that the ancestors of today's great white sharks first appeared around 160 million years ago. But you could also argue that the great white shark is still evolving, and therefore it's impossible to pinpoint exactly when it first appeared. And finally, the concept of a species is somewhat arbitrary. Biologists generally consider species to be groups of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. But in reality, there are many different ways that organisms can reproduce. Some animals can reproduce both sexually and asexually, and some can hybridize with other closely related species. So ultimately, it's impossible to say exactly when the great white shark first appeared. And the same goes for the mackerel shark. These sharks are examples of what's known as evolutionary stasis, which is when a lineage shows very little change in the fossil record over long periods of time. But even during periods of stasis, evolution is still happening. Small changes are still occurring in the genome, and these changes can lead to big differences over time. Sharks are a perfect example of the balance between evolution and stability. They have found a successful formula and have kept their body design for hundreds of millions of years, while their genes and behaviors continue to evolve internally. So next time you see a shark, remember that it's not just a relic of the past, but a living, breathing example of evolution in action. Thanks for watching this episode, which was brought to you by our incredible community of patrons. You all make it possible for us to bring fun science videos to everyone for free.